Hey everybody, welcome back to Contest Prep University. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Adam Atkinson. We have been in a long conversation in our D1 club group about how to scale and pace your off season. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to put a little bit more meat on that bone in terms of going through all the different tangential processes that it takes to use your off season for your best next prep. And that's the critical component to me, Adam, in that I was thinking if this is your first contest prep, your first season, you don't even know what you don't know. You got to go through the experience. I try not to overcoach those clients. You can't expect somebody looking at their first contest to know every nuance of what's going to happen and even how their body's going to respond, how they feel, how they think they need to look. You've got to experience some of those things first. But at some point, flash forward to the person who's been in this for 5 or 10 years, on some level, you want to never leave this sport without knowing you have given it your best. You've done everything you possibly can. And there's just a process that I've seen over and over and over for 25 years of coaching where it always begins in the off season. How well they managed and just took every single step necessary, always looking forward to that next prep, is what made them finally get over the hump and hit their best possible genetic, look and end up feeling like, wow, I've really accomplished what I want to in this industry. So, in just that kind of a broad conceptual phraseology, how do you look at off seasons and how do you maybe explain that to clients?
Yeah, I think the one of my big things with my coaching and one of my philosophies is, you obviously want to take your off season seriously, but this is also a time to relax and, not be 100% all in. Because if you are 100% all in, what is the back end or your next prep going to look like? And I really want to teach my clients balance. So, I think with, balance being a really hard term to describe, one of the biggest thing is describing like what are your off-season goals. So, obviously hitting your reverse diet first. And then as you get into the peak of that metabolic building season, you can kind of start planning some more precise goals after that point, as long as body fat's been managed. And I think that's one of the things in that goal setting. You have to accept that there's going to be some type of fat gain involved in this. And that's maybe not necessarily everyone's goal. But for a lot of my clients, I kind of like to, after a couple weeks, give them like a maybe a weight cap initially, and then we can kind of shift some things off of there.
There are two really good points to start with. Number one, I literally had that conversation with two clients this week, one male, one female, who have both just finished their first off season. I'm sorry, their first prep, and so then now they're in their off season. And of course, they're being very meticulous and they want to make sure they're doing everything well. And I had to say, okay, well, we also do want to have a little fun. This is a chance to pull back and relax a little bit. So I want you to keep that mentality of 80 or 90% in a relaxed sort of way, if that makes sense. You're going to put in the time in the gym, you're going to train hard, you're going to eat well most of the time. Keep an eye on body fat gain and rate of gain, but still save your white hot intensity for the next prep. But what you just said about a weight cap, that's one of the biggest conversation pieces in our D1 club this week. And we have members of the club posting pictures and here's where I'm at, here's my weight, last contest versus now. What do you think? Should I gain a little bit? Should I do a little mini cut? Things like that. And just as a broad standard, I would say an average size female frame, maybe try not to gain more than about 10 pounds. As soon as you get over your metabolic set point, there just is no real advantage to gaining more body fat. We'll talk about that in a minute. For a male, maybe 15 pounds. If you're a pretty big heavyweight, light heavyweight kind of guy, maybe 15 to 20. But if you have to spend your next prep in just a Mach 5 nosedive of body fat loss, getting the cardio, being perfect on nutrition for 4, 5, or 6 months just to get lean enough, you're never going to look your ultimate best. You have to save some time for some diet breaks. You got to save time at the end to make sure you're repleting, rebuilding calorie intake a little bit, getting hopefully close to maintenance levels of food. Um, and again, you may do fine, but you're never going to reach that ultimate best possible condition without that. And that's what I want today's feature to be about is what is that magical off season that leads to your best contest. So um, I've got a few stories of clients and myself, but can you think of a specific client who may have been having an okay career and then they just reached that zenith? They really used the off season for a springboard into their best contest.
Yeah, one of my clients, Caitlin, she's been in a complete year off. I'm actually getting ready to post about her. But from her last year to exactly now, which was yesterday, she's up about 20 pounds from her stage weight. And one of my clients was commenting, she was like, I can't believe how lean she still looks with being up 20 pounds. And we've certainly put on quite a bit of muscle. We have some things we're working on hormonally still. So, like, things still are not perfect, but they're better than they were. So, we have a lot of things in a better spot. And those are probably some of the other things we'll get into on the conversation. But yeah, she's worked with me since 2019. Every year has gotten better. And I think that's what really makes an athlete is the longer they work with you and in those later years when they're still making progress, that's when it is typically harder because you've accumulated a higher genetic level of muscle and it's just harder and harder to push past that every year.
Mhm. Well, I've got two clients right now who both pro men, and they had great extended off seasons like you talked about. One of them was off for a couple years, one was off for 3 or 4 years. And you would think, well, they've been off that long, they could have put on tons of weight, they could be powerlifting or something like that and really pursuing that extra lean body mass. And then with such an extended off season, now it's going to be a long, arduous prep. Not at all the case. Both of them came to me as they know I already like these are previous clients with about a 6 month time frame for pre-contest, and they were already almost stage ready. I mean, these are guys, Adam. I mean, they're already pros, so they've been around the block. And I'm looking at these photos. I'm like, geez, we don't have a lot of work to do. And of course, that was their intended goal, but they were still incredibly full, having these great off seasons. And so we were able to just tiptoe into some body fat loss without excessive cardio, without excessive calorie deficits. We've had to induce some calorie intake, some diet breaks, just to make sure we're not getting ready too soon, which is a very odd thing for me to say because I always say you can never be ready too soon. But these guys were so good already, and now their food intakes are just enormous. If you looked at these gentlemen, one who's around 160 pounds, one who's closer to 190, and you would say, okay, they're eating 400, 500 grams of carbs a day, 80, 90, 100 grams of fat a day, the most protein, two and a half, 3 times the RDA. It's like, wow. And they're actually still this lean, this far out. Both of them are going to have the clear opportunities to be leaner than they've ever thought genetically possible. And one of them competing at a pro world level, I said, we're gonna make jaws drop. Like, we're gonna be safe, but I want you to be the leanest human being that has ever been on a stage. And he's like, yeah, let's do that. And he's ready. He's 2 months away, and he already looks like he could win this contest. That's what I'm talking about. And so if this is your first, second, third prep, you may not even know what that means. You may not even visually know a representation of what your body could look like in that kind of framework. But keep an eye on photos and contests you go to and look for those people and talk to them about what they did.
Absolutely. Yeah, each year can accumulate off of the last. And that's why the off season is so important is, it really, I always say it's the runway of the long jump before you hit the board and the board being prep. So what you do in that off season is going to be your momentum for prep. Um, I actually have a client right now who is competing, who her coach handed her off to me 6 weeks out. And we looked at her photos from, last year to this year. And we looked at her photos from 3 years ago. And she has been competing a lot of times every year, and she's lost muscle. She is just not taking the opportunity. And she's like, why can't I look like this again? And I said, tell me a little bit about your competition history. And when she started telling me all the shows, I said, well, that is why you are struggling with looking as good as you did. And when you're coming from a team where you have, a top five Olympian and they compete all year round, it's one of those things where, I think that a lot of teams think everyone's the same, but, when you have someone with insane genetics, you can get away with like a massive margin of error and still win. It's just those people have insane genetics. It's not necessarily about the coaching as much as it is the genetic gift that that coach got blessed with. And then unfortunately, they kind of design their seasons and their programming around somebody who is just not the norm. It's a great example of how not taking an off season can make you degress just by competing so often.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I talk about a lot as a coach who mentors other coaches and does business development work. Um, I love the underdog. I love the person who needs to grind and fight for everything that they get. I mean, that's just a human archetype that I like. Those people who are willing to get the job done. And I've had my share of genetic freaks. You can be genetically amazing and still not do well. I've helped them get over some humps and win, but I've also taken far, 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 far more average genetically gifted people and beaten people like that because we've gotten to a place where nobody else knew how to get to. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. Like, what does it really take? What is that work that we're describing? And one of my newer clients who joined me in the off season, was already at a comfortable weight. She has gained about 8 to 10 pounds, and she was pretty stable. So I'm getting used to her physiology, and we're planning for this next prep. And I said, well, that doesn't mean we're done. Like, I know you're stable and we've pretty much tapped out the amount of body fat and weight we want, but have we really pushed forward your metabolic capacity as far as we can? And so we've started interjecting different strategies for how to increase food intake, not to gain body fat, not to gain weight for the sake of weight, but let's just see if because of the thermic effect of food and through just the strategic timing of food and maybe quality, if we can sneak in a little extra, pre-workout, post-workout, better recovery, better performance. And so we've gone through about a month and a half, maybe 2 months of these small increases. And so we're adding calories, we're adding carbs and fat to different places. And you'll see her weight go up a pound or two, and then it kind of falls back down and stabilizes, and then we make another increase and it falls back down. And so we are truly pushing that envelope as far as we can so that when we start the prep, again, we don't have 30 pounds to lose in 12 weeks. We're going to have 8 to 10 pounds to lose in 6 months. And she's going to have that biggest, absolute, most fully recovered metabolism that you could ever hope for. And if you are too heavy, you miss that opportunity. I have other clients. This is part of our D1 club conversation this week too, who are saying, "Well, gosh, I've kind of missed the boat. I think I've added too much. Should I do a mini cut? Should I? I'm in the off season, not going to start prep for a few months. Should I go ahead and start losing a little bit now to get ready? How do you handle that type of situation?"
Like, how do I handle if they've gone too far?
Yeah, do you like to see people do some little cyclical cuts through an off season, or do you just say no, let's not worry about it? How would you
Yeah,
handle?
absolutely. And one thing I find more often than not too, usually once they're at that peak, the digestive system usually starts having a harder time handling that anyhow. So one, it's great to give the GI system a little bit of a break, but also if you do need to tone down body fat levels, and I think we deal with that quite a bit when people, especially newer athletes, they're in prep, things are really structured, they're really hungry. They get in the off season and food is just exciting for them, and they have a hard time turning off those switches that are, really lighting up those, taste buds and everything else. And, you get them to a point where they're finally in a good rhythm, but they're maybe 5 or 8 pounds heavier than you would have liked them to be because they finally, mentally recovered from dieting. So sometimes you do have to rewind, but I actually had one of my pro girls, we just decided on like a 6 week mini cut because she went just a little bit further than we would have liked. But before I brought her back, I said, do you feel mentally recovered from your season to do this? And she said, yes. And I think we always have to keep mentality at bay with people where they are in life. And those are all the factors that beyond paper make this very difficult as coaches.
Yeah, you just gave a perfect analysis of how to preferentially decide. I have a client exactly as you just described, and that is, he did his first contest ever, and now he's in the off season, and we had our goals, and he got to the point where he thought maybe I'm just a little too soft. You said let's not gain more than 10 to 12 pounds. I feel like 15. I'm definitely a little softer. Maybe we should do a mini cut. And I had the exact same conversation. Well, we're we're still pretty close to the contest season we just ended. Why don't we just stabilize, reduce food, maybe 100 calories or so, just make sure you're not gaining more. And if you drift down a little bit, fine, but let's just not go there yet. And I don't want this to sound like it conflicts with advice in our D1 club, people I've been talking to there, uh, because there used to be an actual method. I remember 10 or 15 years ago, there was even a name for it where people would intentionally surge forward, gain 10 or 15 pounds in 2 months, and then do a mini cut, and then gain, and then mini cut, and gain, and mini cut. So they're just constantly dieting in the off season, kind of a hyper anabolic phase and then a catabolic phase. And I thought, physiologically, when you look at what you're doing, this just makes zero sense. Zero sense. There's just no advantage. And now we have research just this year proving how much of a fallacy that kind of thought process was. But there is a time, as you just said, Adam, where it's like, okay, your metabolism's strong. We're this far into the off season, but we went a little too far. Let's peel back a little bit now while we can still then recover again before we start the official prep. I think that's incredibly appropriate because you just want to make sure you're managing that starting point. But just to constantly cycle through dieting in the off season, even if it's an extended off season, I think is really going to harm that person in the end.
Absolutely. I think that used to be called the rebound method. Am I right?
It sounds familiar, but that maybe something else. I have to look that up. I'm curious now.
Yeah, it's bugging me that I can't remember.
It was a thing. I mean, a lot of people were asking questions about it 10 or 15 years ago. But I have a client who is about ready to compete, and she's experiencing what you and I have described as that ultimate ability because of such a managed off season to really hit a crazy new level. And I wonder, just to spend a little time talking more about bikini competitors and figure competitors, there is that absolute division criteria model. You look at somebody, speaking of good genetics, a female who doesn't have to worry that much about estrogen dominant lower body fat accumulation, cellulite, and so forth. Um, but when you're looking at a female who really does need to get the glutes and the hams as lean as possible, and yet we've got to keep the shoulder and upper body thickness. We can't just dwindle away to nothing. How do you find it best for women who struggle with that? The ones who really do have a hard time getting the lower body fat off, and yet, this off season comes into play. How much weight did you gain? How much dieting do we have to do? Do you have any advice or methods for those real difficult cases of women trying to get lean?
Yeah, for sure. First, always fix the estrogen dominance and look at like what level you're experiencing that. Now, this is where it's tricky because I do hear a lot of like functional practitioners and other coaches talk about, somebody's look being they're definitely estrogen dominant because they're holding in the lower half of their body. Well, like heck, sometimes that's just where people store their body fat, So just because how somebody looks doesn't always mean that always the case. But always test and don't guess. Look at the labs, and if higher estradiol is in play, then you need to look at digestion. Honestly, sometimes this is going to sound really geeky, but it can come down to all the products that these females use, if it's like a lot of paraben products and stuff like that that raise estradiol levels, that could actually contribute to some of that estrogen dominance and the reason that they're kind of holding in the lower body. So detoxing the body of estrogen, naturally as possible. I'll say since we're on a podcast, so gain that estrogen metabolism up, which usually involves GI, liver health, and all of those things combined. And also just gain their testosterone levels up. So then it's not as imbalanced as it should be.
And are you speaking of things like just getting enough sleep, making sure you're not overtraining, doing too much cardio, etc.?
Yeah, so depending on what phase they're in and they're having that, so obviously it's going to be harder to fix those things in prep. And we have to keep in mind most women become estrogen dominant during the prep. But if this were an off-season scenario, there's probably some more active recovery things we can be doing to help that. And then sometimes you do have to push the body fat and the food up a little bit more too hormonally recover. And I'm actually glad we brought this up because sometimes that hormonal recovery and going that extra step is what makes us add another, 5 to 10 pounds of body fat because we really need to hit the rest and reset button for a bit.
Yeah, and speaking of just lower body fat dominance, I think of all the different hormones that liberate body fat adipose tissue into circulation to be used as energy. And catecholamines are just the dominant way that we lose the most body fat, get the most bang for our buck. And those are the adrenaline-based hormones. And so, sometimes managing your nutrition so that in the off season, you can keep enough cardio. I don't want somebody to do too much, but are you doing some with enough intensity to keep those kind of hormones circulating that can definitely help level that playing field? I'll give you an example. Just the question I asked you about women who may just find that the lower body fat dominance is a difficult thing to overcome. I had a client. I think I've mentioned her, use her as an example a few times on the podcast recently. Did her first season, and lost 30 pounds, got down to 6% body fat. She was lean, she was shredded, she looked great. And I thought, well, that's just as good as your glutes and hamstrings can be. No problems at all. She looked fantastic, but she kept saying, well, I think I can get my glutes leaner. I said, I don't know. I mean, it's going to cost you some size. It's a tough thing to consider. But then she went through a great off season where we just used a slow metabolic building phase to get her to, 300 grams of carbs, 40, 50 grams of fat. And still she did not gain more than 6, 8, 10 pounds, probably actually more like 6 or 8. So now all of a sudden we're back in prep and we have the opportunity to get back down to 6% body fat. And we had options. And so now she's at about a legit 4% body fat. I looked at her upper body and I told her this week, I don't think I've ever been as lean as you are right now. And now her glutes are finally at the quality you would see a pro Olympia winner. And we have time, again, to bring calories back up, to start letting glycogen synthesis start doing its thing, raising her metabolism, raising food intake a little bit, increasing fullness. So now we're at the tail end of prep, having reached that new level pretty early in her career. And it only took one controlled, well-managed off season. And even somebody who may have had a difficult time getting her glutes or hamstrings lean enough, that was the answer. It was just having a successful off season, metabolically, recovery wise, anabolic wise, but still just going through that process with a lot of discipline. So you and I started this by saying, hey, off seasons are here to relax a little bit. You're going to gain a little body fat. You got to get used to seeing your body with a little bit of quote normal body fat. But still, when you want that perfect prep, you've got to be disciplined enough to have that perfect off season first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any final advice on this? How to scale, pace, manage your off season, Adam? Anything we didn't cover?
I think that people have to, you know, keep their expectations realistic and really look at yourself from a genetic perspective. Like I knew when you know, was a bodybuilder, I would never be a Mr. Olympia. And like that was okay because I was still able to enjoy the process. And this can be a lot of fun changing your own body because no one else has it, and there's not one other exactly like yours. And seeing your legs get bigger, or muscle groups that you want to grow on a personal level is super rewarding. So even if you feel like you don't have the genetic capacity, that's one of the great things about art. It is, per the viewer, and you should view your own art as something that you enjoy. And even if it's not, what society or bodybuilding standards call to be the best, beyond just the art of it, there's a lot of great health benefits that can come from this along the way.
For sure, for sure. And man, just another great conversation that I had with a client was exactly about that. There's that one side of you that's like, hey, I'm going to be happy, whatever. I'm enjoying the journey. I'm doing this for multiple reasons, and I'm liking it. There's nothing that just seems just torturous to me, but damn it, I want to win. I want to make sure I've left it all on the field, and so that's what we're doing here. We're helping you guys with the tools and the tricks and the information that can hopefully help. Comes from a lot of education and experience, but if you want to be part of that, of course, we are coaches. We have limited openings for schedules as clients, come and go. That I always have room for a couple new clients a month, but even without paying for coaching rates, we mentioned our Contest Prep University D1 Club. For just $3 a month, you can join that group. We're always in there facilitating every day, having conversations, having private meetings with our members, and it's $3 a month. So even if you have a coach, you are a coach, you could be in there, participate in what I think is a great group of people just trying to do their best and learn all this stuff together. So thank you guys, and thank you, Adam. We'll see you next time in Contest Prep University.